Simon Ateba is the chief White House correspondent in Washington, D.C. for Today News Africa. He hit the headlines and has remained in them and has attracted hundreds of thousands of followers on social media because, well, frankly, they won't give him a look in, certainly a word in edgeways, in the White House press room. Perhaps because of the perspicacity of his forensic journalism, which we're forced to read mainly on social media, and a very good read it is too. So at the end of this interview, I fully expect each and every viewer of the mother of all talk shows to follow Simon Ateba on social media. He's also got a Substack, which is more and more heavily subscribed. People are flocking to Simon Ateba, which proves the old adage that the book they tried to ban always goes to the top of the bestseller list. He joins us now. Simon, a great pleasure to have you on the mother of all talk shows. Perhaps you could tell those viewers not yet familiar with you, what happened? Why did they decide to shut you up, and how?
Thank you, George, for having me on your show. I understand I like the name, the mother of all talk shows, which is really great. I'm glad to be here. So I spent time covering the White House. As you know, you and I are almost on two different sides. Our newspaper, Today News Africa, focuses on U.S.-Africa relations. We try to promote ties between Africa and the U.S., with relevant and accurate information. And so we expect to get questions, especially when President Biden is receiving 50 African leaders in Washington, D.C., as he did last December. And sometimes it's hard to get those questions. And, and we keep pushing, including as a vice president, is just completing a trip to Africa. She went to 3 African nations, and the First Lady, Jill Biden, just returned from Africa a few weeks ago. And so their job is just to keep pushing and keep trying to see how we can strengthen those relations. And, it's not been perfect. It also means that even in the US and even at the White House, things are not always perfect. They keep improving every day. And people like me keep making sure that we keep moving in the right direction.
Well, I haven't myself seen the improvement every day, but I'll take your word for that, or at least allow you to say that without responding with a raspberry. But to what do you attribute this cold shoulder? It's not race, because the woman who's refusing to call you to ask your questions is herself, I think, Haitian. She's certainly a black American woman. So they're not boycotting you because of your skin color. It must be because of your politics, surely.
Yeah, I think the truth is hard, right? If you ask the tough questions to any press secretary who is there to protect the president. Truth is hard, truth is tough. And so even at the White House, if you ask the right questions, if you ask the tough questions, you are likely to also be sidelined and to also be silenced, the way the press secretary has tried to sideline me. And as I said, it shows that even at the White House, improvement has to continue. It's not a perfect situation where, because you're in the US and journalism is perfect. It's not. And you have to keep pushing. As I said, our publication Today News Africa focuses on strengthening ties between US and Africa, and we can only do that if we are given access to, provide our readers with accurate and relevant information between those ties. If you sideline us, what happens is we are not allowed to do our job, even right here in the US.
But isn't that symptomatic of the US's actual attitude to Africa? I mean, you may be keen on having good ties to them, but they don't actually give a damn about Africa.
So the US is trying to improve ties with Africa. As you know, last August, the Secretary of State Blinken went to South Africa and the DRC and Rwanda. And while he was in South Africa, he unveiled the new US Africa policy, in an attempt to strengthen the ties between the US and Africa. And last December, President Biden also hosted the US Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., which was only the second summit to take place since President Obama left office. The first one took place in 2014. And as I said, the vice president just completing a trip to Africa. She went to Ghana, Zambia, and Tanzania. And the first lady also just returned from Africa. But those trips are not enough. We see China expanding ties in Africa. We see China investing heavily in Africa, while the US seems to be retreating. So I won't say that the US doesn't give a damn. I will say that the US is losing power and losing strength in Africa.
Well, of course, many of these trips, Kamala Harris recently in Ghana, is not to build ties with African countries like Ghana, but to give them orders. In the context of a democracy forum, she lectured Ghana on what their policy should be on LGBTQ plus and trans issues, for example. They go to these African countries not to build ties with Africa, but to warn Africa against getting too close to China. Isn't that true?
And I won't call it exactly like lecture, right? The US officially has some positions on human rights. Officially, the US believes that human rights are important. And when the VP was in Ghana, and even when she went to Zambia and other countries, she talked about human rights. She talked about, the fact that US and Africa should continue to strengthen their relationship. She also talked about the debt, which is a big problem with the IMF and the World Bank, especially, a lot of African countries got billions and billions of dollars during COVID that they are unable to pay. And so I know there's a tendency to lecture some African nations and tell them what is good for them. But we can see that African nations, they are able to think for themselves. As you know, in more than 30 African nations, same-sex relationships are still, against the law because Africans believe that they will be able to come to bring about solution to their own problems. They don't really wait on Kamala Harris to tell them what to do, or even President Biden to tell them what to do. I think that Africans right now, they know they can make their own decisions, and they know who is their friend, who has been there for them, and who they should do business with. And right now, African nations are doing businesses with China, with Russia, with Europe, with the US, and with other countries. The US is trying to explain to them that they are the best alternative. And as someone who works for Today News Africa and trying to strengthen ties between US and Africa, we believe that it's in the interest of Africa to strengthen ties between US and Africa.
Finally, Simon, what's the attitude of your fellow correspondents there in the room? Have they been supportive to you? Give us a picture of that, if you would.
Yes, so most people don't do it in public. Most people send me text messages, write me on Twitter, see me outside the White House to tell me that they really want me to understand what I'm trying to do, and they support me, but they can't do it in public because it will put them in the bad book of the press secretary. So they can stand up for me in the briefing room.
How brave of them. I don't know quite how to put this, but if she was working for me, I'd definitely be looking for a replacement. I have seen press secretaries by the dozen in my political lifetime, and she is by far the worst, almost farcically so. Do the press corps think that way, or are they too diplomatic to say so?
So when Karine Jean-Pierre, the name of the press secretary, when she came last May, she's going to clock 1 year in May, and this is already April, so she'll be 1 year in, on her job next month. At the beginning, it was tough. She made some improvements. She used to read the binder a lot. And as you know, the US is a superpower, like, Russia and other big countries in the world, where you try to address global issues. When President Putin is having a press conference, they don't just ask him about Russia. They ask him about Ukraine, about, the US and Europe and different things. It's not the same thing in many countries around the world. In the US, it's the same thing. And so if you are the press secretary, you are asked about everything under the sun, including what happens in space. And so it's good that she does her homework, and I think she's made some improvement, but she's not made a lot of improvement when it comes to being fair to people like me in the briefing room who have questions to ask and who are trying to do their job and strengthen ties between US and Africa.